welcome to Season 5, Episode number 8 of the Outlap F1 podcast. It's our 2023 Aussie Grand Prix race review. We are, as always, part of the Ship It Studios podcast network. You've got Andy, and I am along with Cody tonight, and we may be joined later on in the show by the guest who will hopefully come on in a little bit, but Cody and I are going to get the ball rolling tonight. Cody, he's back from his pilgrimage out to somewhere in Western Illinois, but how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Didn't get destroyed by the storms. Didn't get destroyed by spring colds. So yeah, good to go. Managed to stay awake for the race. Qualifying less so.
I will tell you, my circadian rhythms by the end of last night were in the absolute crapper. They were completely screwed up. It's once a year. I love this race. I love this course. I love everything about it. So I managed to hop myself up on enough caffeine to somehow get through the qualifying and then do it again 24 hours later for the race. So what was it, about 3:45, everything finally shut off. And I got to the end and I'm like, I'm not waiting out the post-race penalties. And as it turned out, I was right. Because by the time I woke up, they were just breaking. So I'm like, no, it was a good decision. Good decision. But we will get into all of the fun and craziness that was the Aussie Grand Prix weekend. And as always, you can find our show on Twitter, what's left of it, Instagram, Discord, Reddit, and YouTube at Outlap F1 Podcast. See the link tree in our show notes. If you're watching this on YouTube, do us a favor and click the like and subscribe button. Or if you're on your favorite podcasting app, please feel free to click the 5-star button if you're on specifically Apple Podcast or Spotify. You can email our show at chatnow@outlapf1.com. You can find our wonderful website, www.outlapf1.com. As a reminder, thank you so much to our current monetary supporters, including Dean Warwick, Erie Dolchester, Paul Weaver, Quentin Gordon, Kevin Kelly, Regan Stanzik, Timothy Brown, and of course, Jonathan Scott. If you'd like to become a member of what we call our hashtag Outlap F1 Nation, please see our Anchor link in our show notes. $1, $5. It all goes back into the show. It all goes back into making the show better. We've got new equipment that is right now sitting in a box. And as soon as I learn how to work it, I'm vowing to have this up and going by the time we get to Baku. I've got 4 weeks. I think I should be able to figure it out by then. If not, then I guess I'm not very technical. Anyway, if you, like I said before, all the money you give goes right back into the show. You can take advantage of our code OUTLAP from the good folks at Manscaped. Do us a solid, go over there, use the code, get yourself 20% off and free shipping with their wonderful products. You can check out our buddy Vincenzo Landino and his shirt line at thef1guy.com. He's got some nice, good, high-quality merch for not necessarily the F1 price tag. Feel free to go check that out. That's some good stuff there. And our final sponsor, the Portage Park Development Project, the thriving community in the Upland Metaverse. If you're from Chicago, Portage Park will sound familiar because Upland Metaverse is based on real-world cities and properties, and Portage Park is an actual neighborhood in Chicago, and we want to show the best that it has to offer. Come join them. Links to the Portage Park Discord server, racing track maps, and socials are in our podcast show notes. As always, we hope to see you in the Metaverse. All right, with the particulars out of the way, we will start off with our headlines of the day. Cody, take it away, sir.
All right. My headline of the day is a confusing end following one too many red flags. I was on board with the first two, despite the fact that the track looked like it might have been, clean upable with a safety car, especially the one with the gravel looked like it was going to take a while to clean up, so I can kind of see why they did that one. But by the end, after the chaos of that 2 laps to go restart, I think that last red flag was just maybe a little too much. Was the track too crowded that they couldn't just squeeze the cars around for 2 more laps to call it a day? And instead we get this weird end to the race where some drivers suffered the consequences of that penultimate lap and some didn't. I'm not really sure I totally agree with how that was handled.
FIA confusion? Surely you're jesting here. You're joking here. When have we ever seen that before? My headline is, what is it about the last race before a break? And why don't we get this kind of crazy stuff more often? I mean, I don't know what happens. You send these teams on even a mini break, and they all kind of go, balls to the walls at the end, and I loved it. Unfortunately, I think this race is also going to be remembered for more than likely all of the wrong reasons, as opposed to what was actually a really good spectacle and some really good wheel-to-wheel racing. I thought it was very entertaining. I loved the weekend. I think the modifications they did to the track, you actually got a chance to see what's been going on. So that's awesome. And I was thoroughly entertained by the Aussie Grand Prix weekend, but we're probably the narrative of the race, I think, is all going to be for all the wrong reasons. So we will get into all of that in just a little bit. Hey, we got our unexpected guest there.
Some fuzzy technical difficulties.
That's all right. It's a cat video now. We're gonna go viral. We're gonna play this up.
Yep, she's like, I'm gonna ruin the podcast if you don't feed me.
Well, and the next Twitter account we have to make is the Outlap Cody's Cat account.
Yeah.
Coming soon to Twitter, Instagram, and maybe Discord.
She's a Ferrari fan.
All right. Awesome. All right. So what now feels definitely forever and a day ago. It happened Friday evening or Saturday early morning. That would be the qualifying. 1 second here. And I'll take you through that. All right. So not actually being able to set a lap in what had been, up to this point, a really gnarly weekend for him, that would be Sergio Perez, not classified and starting in P20. P19 was Valtteri Bottas. P18, Logan Sargent. Showed a little bit more of his rookie self, I think, on this track this weekend. P17 was Zhao Guanyu. P16 was Oscar Piastri, local hero, unable to get out of Q1. P15 was Nick DeVries. P14 was Kevin Magnussen. P13 was Lando Norris. P12 was Yuki Tsunoda. And P11, just missing out on the Q3 shootout, was Esteban Ocon. P10, from 10 to 1. P10 was Nico Hülkenberg. P9 was Pierre Gasly. P8, Alexander Albon. P7, Charles Leclerc. P6 was Lance Stroll. P5, Carlos Sainz, flying the flag for Ferrari. P4 was Fernando Alonso. And P3 and P2, respectively, both the Mercedes, in Lewis Hamilton in P3 and George Russell in P2. But none were better in qualifying than the usual suspect, P1, Max Verstappen, with a 1:16.732. All right. Cody, any thoughts on the qualifying?
Yeah, you had some drivers looking pretty far from hooked up. Sergio Perez looked like he went off the same part of the track in practice and qualifying. And qualifying had happened so quickly, he didn't even get a classified lap time. After looking so good and being able to keep up with Max last week or a couple weeks ago, at Saudi Arabia, it was surprising to see him kind of floundering in that car up to the race anyway. Some other ones. Alexander Albon, big surprise there. It was really good to see him get into Q3 and even out-qualify Pierre Gasly and Nico Hülkenberg in that Williams car. So he's getting it hooked up pretty well. It's too bad that didn't carry through the rest of the weekend, but I'm sure we'll get to that shortly.
Well, and the thing about Albon was, talk about dominating the middle sector. He was setting consistent purple sectors, even up to the last lap. All of a sudden, you would look and it would, Max purple 1, Max purple 3, Albon purple 2. So whatever they were doing in that middle sector, that Williams car was definitely hooked up. Shame that Logan Sargent couldn't take advantage of the same type of setup, whether or not the car was working for him or not this weekend. This was also the first weekend where we had F2 and F3 support races in Australia. And I think anybody who hadn't been at this track, they all looked like they learned a lot this weekend. All the F2 guys, all the F3 guys, and Logan Sargent and all the rookies. I think if you hadn't raced this track before, there was some learning to be had, and they all kind of looked like they needed it. Kind of surprising to see Ferrari not necessarily getting it hooked up in qualifying like we had been typically used to. And then they were replaced by a suddenly now on the strong end Mercedes, only a couple tenths off a pole. I'm going to slam the brakes on everybody that says that this team is back and they need to go with this concept and it's all fine. They were great here last year. This is kind of a one-off track. I wouldn't necessarily put this in the bag and say, give me more. It was great to see. I hope maybe it is the harbinger of things to come. We need some championship contenders here. And I think they're probably the closest other than it's going to be either them or Ferrari. One of them is going to decide to either go with the concept or not and hopefully get it going. But good to see Mercedes at least on form here. Great laps, I think, by both Hamilton and Russell here.
Yeah, it was nice seeing them pull back up to the front. Like you said, they outdid Ferrari this weekend. It was kind of nice just for a change to see Carlos Sainz able to consistently during qualifying outperform Charles Leclerc. I haven't been giving him much of the benefit of the doubt up till now, but he definitely carried his weight this weekend.
Yep, for sure. All right, so now we will get into the Sunday proper, the race itself. We're kind of going to divide this into basically two kind of segments, I think. One, we'll kind of do our typical go through the field, tell you where everybody finished type of deal. And then at the end, we're going to kind of go through the various different incidents because there were lots of them and they kind of merit their own kind of separate discussion. So here's the interesting thing about our back marker list. I don't know if in the history of the podcast we've had this since we've gone to this way of doing it, where they all DNF'd. Oh, so P20 to P13 did not see the checkered flag. Here's your list of non-finishers. The first one, Charles Leclerc. He ends up not classified in technically P20. P19 was Alex Albon. P18, George Russell. P17, Kevin Magnussen. P16, Logan Sargent. P15, Nick DeVries. P14, Esteban Ocon. P13, Pierre Gasly. Both the Alpines out of the points on what was looking like a really good day for them. Lots of big names back here. Leclerc, Russell, Ocon, Gasly. Where do you want to start?
Well, to start with, I feel bad for the ones who are here at the back through not really any fault of their own. George Russell had that power unit failure after running at the front of the race at the beginning. So that was a shame to see him first kind of get shuffled out of contention via strategy call at a poor time and then get completely taken out by that power unit failure. Charles Leclerc, I don't know if you could really say he was there through entirely his fault. He kind of looked like he was responsible for the accident that took him out of the race, but you could chalk that up to first lap chaos. So I feel
and Lance Stroll doing Lance Stroll things.
Yeah, it was really easy to look at that initially and think, oh man, like, what are you doing, Lance? You're taking Charles out of the race. But, the more I watch it, the more it was, kind of looked like that racing incident that they were both trying to go somewhere that, didn't have enough space. And Charles Leclerc just got the worst of it going backwards into the gravel pit, which looked like it was not the way to go. Couldn't carry that momentum to get back out.
All right. Obviously Leclerc, hard luck lap one. That's a lap one thing. Those happen. It was kind of unfortunate he couldn't get it out of the kitty litter, which is like, I liked seeing the kitty litter. At least it was back. So at least we didn't have ultimate runoff, but it does suck when, lap one and 3 corners in and your day is done. So that was kind of unfortunate for him. We'll talk about Kevin Magnussen's retirement when we get to the incidents, and the same with kind of Ocon and Gasly, because that all kind of goes into the crazy ass ending of this race that turned basically the whole thing upside down for more than one competitor here. we've been following the up till now. I think the really good progress of Logan Sargent. I think this was probably his toughest weekend in his young F1 career. Didn't have a good qualifying, did not have a very good race, was not really thrilled with his setup, was telling the team that he wasn't really thrilled with his setup, and the team was basically kind of telling him, like, look, if the car is what it is, you kind of got to drive it. So he had some interesting stuff happen to him late, too, that we will also discuss that kind of went under the radar. He did escape all the penalties, but, he was in all that stuff, too. So, all right. We will now move into the midfield and finishing in P12. Not where we thought he was going to finish for most of this race. That would be Carlos Sainz. P11 was Valtteri Bottas. P10, Yuki Tsunoda. P9 was Zhao Guanyu. P8, hey, look, the local boy makes good. Oscar Piastri in the McLaren scores his first F1 points. Congrats to him. P7 was Nico Hülkenberg. Your hard luck P7 in the Haas Ferrari. Might have deserved a little bit more today. P6 was Lando Norris. P5 was Sergio Checo Perez. And coming from the pit lane to P5, so a hell of a drive for him. He was overtaking on display. And P4 was Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. All right, lots to get into the midfield. Cody, what's your thought?
I'm thinking we're going to get to Carlos Sainz during our next segment here. So
yeah,
I think I'll talk about the good stories here. There's a lot of feel-good stories here in the midfield. We've got your McLaren boys, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, finally scoring some good points here in Australia. It was very nice to see Oscar Piastri be able to score his first Formula One points at his home country. Also really nice to see Zhou Guanyu be able to squeak into ninth place to get a couple more points. I really didn't think Alfa Romeo was going to be able to do it. Nico Hülkenberg, even though you could argue that he was perhaps robbed of his first podium once again, I still think seventh place in the Haas is a very respectable finish.
Yeah, I mean, the midfield was actually quite, I think, for the most part, very entertaining throughout the course of the race. I'll talk about, finally, off the duck, off the shelf, McLaren score points after probably what was one of the more disappointing qualifyings of the season, where Lando Norris's car looked like the back end just kept wanting to come out on him from out from underneath him. He could not get a clean lap the entirety of the session. And one thing I did want to just point out, like, he has that radio message at the end where he goes, yeah, I know. And everyone was like, oh, he sounds so depressed and everything. Let me tell you why. The reason why was because he had tried for 2 consecutive laps to get a flyer in, and he couldn't do it. Now, that's half the car, and maybe that's half him. So he's coming around, and he goes to his engineer, and his engineer told him to box. And he's like, well, wait a minute. We might as well go out if I'm going to make the flag. And he's like, well, then his engineer goes, well, yeah, go ahead and try it. There wasn't anything in that lap, as it turns out. He knew it right about halfway through. And he's like, well, I'm just going to finish this off, and we'll see where we are. And then he comes out. That's the context of that radio message. But yes, this is a parting end to what I have now dubbed the MCL 59 and a quarter, because that car is not done, but we're through our painful races. And look at this. We're somehow in P5. So as unlucky as this team was in Saudi Arabia, this is why you play out the game, and sometimes you get spots that you don't necessarily deserve on pure pace. Did they deserve P6 and P8 today? Probably not, if I'm being brutally honest. Lando deserved, I think, a hard-fought P8. The battle with him and Hülkenberg, inject more of that into my veins, please, because just to watch him get up to that and then to put the moves on and the moves and the counter moves between both those guys was good, clean, hard racing. No incidents there. Nobody took each other out. Nobody spun each other out. Hülkenberg went a little bit off, but he was still able to carry on. So fair play to both guys on that one. Other impressive things. Sergio Perez. I mean, obviously, the Red Bull is still really good. It may have some niggly reliability issues going on, and Sergio may not like how the gearing is working, but it's still really fast in a straight line. And its DRS is just really impressive, what that car seems to manage to do. And the 4th DRS zone helped him out big time. lots of moves on the outside. I think it was that 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 complex. He was taking lots of advantage there. So really good for him to come all the way back from the pit lane to P5. So he introduced a whole lot of new elements. So they've got some stuff that they'll get closer to some engine penalties if they have to take them later on in the year. But, when you're in P20 and qualifying, you don't do it. You might as well throw everything in your pool now. So that was good strategery there for Sergio Perez. All right. And Lance Stroll ends up a nice P4 for him. Good result this ends up being out a really nice result for Aston Martin. They have, in the early part of the championship, solidified their P2 standing. So good result there for both Lance and the team there. I thought after lap 1, he drove a fine race. So no other complaints other than the little incident. But like you said, that's a lap 1 type deal.
He also had Yuki Tsunoda finally squeeze up into the top 10, get that point he's been just missing out on the past couple races.
Well, if you were listening to the Sky feed, he definitely disappointed when David Croft, because Crofty was all into 3 consecutive P11 finishes for Yuki Tsunoda, which apparently would have tied the record for the most consecutive placed finishes in F1 history. So he doesn't do that, but he does get a point. He, when we get to the incidents, is going to be the story of what could have been. It could have been a much brighter day for one Yuki Tsunoda, but still, at least he gets a point. AlphaTauri get a much needed point for them as well. All right, so we will now turn to our podium. If you didn't watch the race and you saw this podium, you probably thought there really wasn't a whole lot going on. Max Verstappen P1, Lewis Hamilton in P2, and good old reliable, apparently, Fernando Alonso in P3. Cody, thoughts on Hamilton, Verstappen, and Alonso?
It was really cool to see all 3 of them up on the podium together. They kept talking about it on the broadcast that you had the 3 big world champions up on the podium together. So that was really neat to see. I don't think we expected anyone other than Max at that top step. Once Lewis Hamilton didn't have George Russell in front of him to keep giving him DRS, it looked like that he was a sitting duck for Max. And Max looked like he got so comfortable pulling out into a nice big lead that he kind of fell asleep at the wheel at one point.
That's true. That's true. Prior to the end of race craziness, he did have an off. All of a sudden, you see him like putting heat back at his tires, and you're like, "What the heck is he doing?" Oh, well, what was it? I think it was turn 13, or right around. It was the second to last turn. Just kind of overcooked it, but had built up enough of an advantage. You see, especially here, kind of how dominant that Red Bull car really can be when it's pushed a little bit. He did lose out on the start to Russell. I thought Russell made a fair play on him. I liked Hamilton's move at the beginning of the race. To me, if you're on the inside, that's what you do. You just force the guy into a no man's zone. So where, he's got to either back out or he's going to go off. I don't buy that he forced me off the, to me, that's good racing. And I thought Lewis left him enough room to, wasn't that big of a deal. Lewis actually damaged his front wing, so he probably came out of the incident actually a little bit worse. But after what we're going to call the first big safety car period, the overtake on the outside, woo! When that Red Bull decides to put it in gear, man, yikes.
When that thing has the DRS active, it turns into a rocket ship.
Yeah, absolutely. Cats of F1 in the background. Yep. We're going to go viral. We're going to go viral tonight. I love it. All right. So, yeah, I mean, and good on Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton for solidifying a hard-fought P2. Alonso looked like he was going to try to challenge him late. Wasn't able to necessarily do it. Obviously, when we're going to talk about all of the incidents and everything, I think that had a good chunk to play with it, but it was setting up to be quite the interesting battle And both guys showing mutual respect, I think, in the cool down room for each other, which I thought was nice to see. Because we know these guys have had a history before.
Yeah.
All right. So we will now kind of take you kind of through the incidents as they unfolded during the race. So that was kind of the finishing order. How do we really get there? So first thing, lap one, like we talked about earlier, great start by George Russell on the dirty side of the track, beats Max to the inside of turn one and takes the lead. Cody, how'd you see it?
I thought it was an excellent move from Russell, and followed by him getting through some very strong fighting by Lewis Hamilton. It looked like Verstappen just didn't get a real great start off the line, was already on the defense right out of the gate. And yeah, I was having a hard time in those first couple laps, but Mercedes definitely, played their cards right and had that 1-2 right out of the gate, which was very exciting. I'll take anything that I can get that isn't going to be Red Bull at the front of the race, because we're going to see plenty of that, I feel, throughout the year. So those little moments where they're not at the front are little gems.
Yeah, and it was great. I think teamwork by the two Mercedes to hold the position early. It looked like it was going to be a very interesting chess match between Max with no teammate to support him versus two Mercedes who, would probably be working together. And unfortunately, that narrative kind of got snapped by Alex Albon, who was having a great weekend up till that point, when he drops it into the kitty litter. And that aforementioned kitty litter pretty much goes everywhere. Obvious safety car. We knew that was going to happen. It was, and then kind of out of the blue, we were not expecting this. All of a sudden, red flag gets thrown. And the red flag gets thrown after the safety car picked up the field, which meant that it was after George Russell had come in to change over to the hard compound of tire, dropped him from P1. I think he came back out in P7 at the time. So I guess a couple things. One, obviously it was a safety car worthy incident. I don't think anybody has any issues with that. It wasn't one of those things that a virtual safety car was going to fix. What everyone is going to call this is the gravel red flag. I've watched it a couple times. The first time I saw it, I agreed very much with Jensen Button on the international broadcast saying, look, why would we do that? We've had long periods of safety car where the sweepers can come out and do it. When I looked at it the second time and I actually watched the gravel itself, because I'm like, okay, really, how bad was it? It was covering almost the entirety of the track. It was very thick on the inside of that one turn, but it was also thick enough on the outside of that turn. If you let the cars go at speed through there and two or three drivers get a puncture from that, FIA is almost in a no-win situation here. What do you do? I guess that's kind of my take on it. So I kind of bought the first red flag. I'm okay with it. I thought the timing of it's a little suspect. I wish, and I don't know what happens in race direction. I've watched this in other categories where they have them mic'd up, and Formula E is actually a really good example of this, where will have the race direction completely talking to all the teams when they come in. I didn't know if they had broadcast and said, we're thinking about a red flag, or this may be red flag. And if that gets communicated and then these teams jump into the pits anyway, well, there's nothing more you can do. I feel for George in that if they just came out and said red flag and they flashed it and they didn't communicate anything, that's a tough pill to swallow. I've seen Lando Norris get screwed by that in Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago, where, he had come in. I thought that was a great strategy. I'm like, okay, good. He's going to make our thing work. And then they red flagged it, and then, they're done and in the back for the rest of the race. So what's your take on, one, do you think it was worthy of a red flag? And two, how'd you see it from a Mercedes thought?
I agree with you that the red flag was probably warranted, and out of the gate, I thought that it was silly to call it, because I figured that they could clean that up under a safety car, that after they would go by, they would have, enough time to clean up a significant amount of it before they came around for the next lap. but like you said, there was so much gravel out there on the track that they're not going to get enough of it cleaned up before the cars come around. That there's going to be, a tolerably low enough risk of getting a puncture. So I feel that the red flag was right to keep that from happening anyway. I do feel bad for George. I don't really think that was all, on the FIA for that, because they might have thought that they could get it cleaned up under the safety car too, and then people get over there to clean it up, and they're like, hey, this is going to take a while, and then they call the red flag. Calling in George was kind of a bit of a risky play anyway, and he just got burned. It does happen sometimes, and so I don't think anyone was trying to screw him. I just think it was bad luck, and they were taking the bet with bringing him in.
So then I think this also kind of brings in then the next kind of debate topic that I've seen bandied about, which would be, okay, red flag, probably okay. But when they come in for the red flag, why in the heck is F1 the only racing series that lets you basically, one, fix your car, and two, change your tires? Like, there were a couple teams that didn't even have to really make a pit stop. Haas loved this strategy, by the way. This is how they've scored their mega points, where they've scored big points. It's always been on races with a red flag where they never really have to make a pit stop. So you have this situation where I think there was even a couple of teams that only did one maybe live pit stop the entirety of the race because of all the red flag incidents. So do you agree that we should kind of keep this rule as we are, or should we kind of go along with every other racing series and say, okay, this is a pause to the race. If you want to come into the pits, you got to do it after the red flag comes out or is taken away? What's your thought?
I feel like you have to kind of let it happen, though. And I mean, I got some of this in my head from watching the P1 podcast, actually. But I almost think you have to let the teams change all their tires in the pits, because they have to go back out for that formation lap to get around for
the standing start
to the grid again
when
you start. And if via the stuff that happened from the accident that caused the red flag, you might have some drivers going through some debris, they're going to get punctures possibly, and you can't tell them, okay, well, you got to go around and complete the formation lap on a punctured tire and then come back into the pits after taking the grid, or coming back in for the starting from the pit lane, essentially. And in Formula One, tire wear is everything. They have it planned down to the lap usually when they're going to pit. They do so much studies on how the tires wear down. That's everything. So if you let a few teams replace the tires because they had damage from racing incident, then the other teams are going to be crying foul, because now they're suddenly at a disadvantage because they're on worn tires and they're not being given that same treatment of starting on fresh tires. So I think just to avoid that whole debacle, you almost have to let them all just change the tires in the red flag.
So I would agree with, as the rules are currently written, I think you make a very good point. You're absolutely right about the start, coming around to do a standing start. Any sort of tire wear, I've heard enough team radio in my life to agree that the drivers are all going to be like, these tires are not literally going to do the start. The wheels are going to spin and somebody's going to plow into the back of me. So I get that entirety of the argument. What I would do if I was the czar of the world, and some people may think I'm qualified to be that, but maybe not.
Czar's an interesting choice of title.
Yeah, exactly. Took it by force. If I was that, what I would do in this type of situation is I would open the pit lane, let everybody come around, instead of one formation lap, do two. Give everybody a chance to come in, make live stops, because that's what happens in like NASCAR. That's what happens in IndyCar. Yeah, there's some pit lane issues that you're going to have to deal with, but guess what? You're Formula One. You have the most efficient pit crews on the planet. You got to kind of figure out a way to do this. Let everybody who needs to get service, but make it part of the race, make it part of what's going to happen. Wherever you come out, guess what? That's your lineup order. And if you decided to take the risk on old, cold tires to go out there to get track position, that's on you. That's not on anybody else, because we at least gave you an opportunity to. But I don't love the fact that we just get to come in and throw the rule book effectively out the window, or throw the strategy calls completely out the window. And poor George Russell, who thought he was doing something good, comes in and gets completely taken out by that. I don't like watching that either. It would have been fun to maybe see how he could have rallied. We're never going to know, and as it turns out, it didn't matter because his engine blew up. But in that instance, that's how I would get through that if we're going to do a standing start. If there's too little laps left in the race, maybe then it's a rolling start. But they seem to, if the weather is fine, they want to be doing these standing starts. I get that. It's fun. Everybody enjoys it. But I would make one extra lap in order to give everybody the opportunity to pit to see if they would want to. All right. Well, we already kind of talked about George Russell and the engine going kaput. Apparently, it was one of their bigger kaputs in a long time. Just kind of unfortunate. There was lots of smoke. According to, Ted Kravitz, he said it sounded like a jet engine. So we've seen Ferrari run into problems. Now Mercedes has got to be kind of on the back foot going, when is our engine penalty coming?
Honestly, my thought from when that happened, my very first thought was, son of a bitch, he got the point for the engine failure. Can't believe it. But yeah, George Russell's race went from very promising to completely gone in a very short amount of time. Just really bad luck for him.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have seen the fight, like I said before, between Lewis, Max, and George. The three of them maybe being able to make something cook. It may have been Max just going away anyway, because once he kind of decided to drop the hammer, that's what he did to Lewis after that restart. But I would have loved to have at least had the opportunity to watch it play out. So that kind of felt I was a little robbed as a fan there, but yeah, unfortunate for George there. So his day ends, no points for him. So I guess we kind of fast forward through all of the decent racing in the midfield. We didn't see a whole lot of racing at the front until we get to lap 53, and that's where it all kicks off yet again. Kevin Magnussen, of all people, who was having not the greatest day, but it wasn't bad, drops it in, I forget what turn it was, but he basically hits the wall. The tire goes flying off the car completely, and debris everywhere. And an odd thing happened with this incident, even though the TV cameras were right on it. Like, it went to yellow flag in his sector, and then the track went green, and then you see this shot of the tire sitting on the track with nothing out there, and then we finally got yellow flags, double yellow flags, safety car, and then after a lap behind the safety car, because we were running out of laps, red flag number 2. All right, so did you think this was worthy of a second red flag? Do you think it was more about them trying to preserve a green flag finish? Take us through your thoughts on this entire incident.
Going off your description of the play-by-play of how it finally got to the red flag, it sounds like someone in race control got the buttons on their board mixed up.
It could be. That very well could be.
I think ultimately they were, and they've said that they are making an effort to do this. I think it ultimately came down to that they wanted the race to end under green flag conditions for the sake of excitement for the race. And I don't wholeheartedly disagree with that. You see other racing series like NASCAR has overtime, it used to be called the green white checker, where even if the race distance is completed under a yellow flag, they make attempts to try to finish the race under green flag conditions for the sake of that excitement. So if that was their intention, they're definitely not the first racing organization to try to do that. I feel like, though, they don't have that clearly stated in the rules anywhere, and that they maybe should, because they seem to be very wishy-washy, as they are with a lot of things, about when exactly are they going to red flag the race at the end for the sake of that green flag finish, and when are they going to let it roll out through to a safety car finish like they did at Monza, I believe it was last year, where it kind of took the wind out of everyone's sails for the end of the race. So, yeah, maybe they need a hard rule on that. As far as the track conditions, it was, they had lots of debris out on the track, and they had called a red flag in the race for that already. I didn't really get a good look as to how much debris was actually out there. But if it goes back to we don't want the drivers coming around through this, potentially getting punctures and whatnot, especially as we're going into, what could have been a safety car finish, where they're just dropping out because they're forced to go through that. And like this one, I'm less confident on than the first red flag, but I can respect what they were trying to do, whether they were trying to be consistent with that first red flag and the debris being out on the track, or whether they were trying to make the end exciting. Yeah, you're going to have some drivers that are going to get screwed, whether it's a safety car finish or a red flag. So, because of that, if you think the red flag is the more exciting way to go for it. I guess that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and we've had so I guess my thoughts on this are, one, we've had the precedent in Baku last year, or a couple of years, 21, where they reset the grid, did a standing start with basically 2 laps to go, and had a 2-lap finish, and it was awesome, and everybody loved it. So I got the thought, we had time on the race clock, we had enough daylight to make this work, we were going to get the track in working order again. I understand the decision, and every once in a while to do something for the show, I think is fine. Where I hate is what you called the wishy-washiness of all of this. I wish, and you compared it to NASCAR, and NASCAR is a great example because they were just at Circuit of the Americas last week, and I watched what was going to be a fuel strategy, interesting type road race come down to not 1, not 2, but 3 green-white checkers of craziness. And by the third one, you're like, okay, I've already seen everybody play bumper cars. I would really like to go home now. Just end the damn thing, will you? Will you just keep each other off from spinning out so we can finish this thing? And the right guy ended up probably winning the race. The car that was the most dominant that day did win. So I didn't have a problem with the necessary result. And hey, it got Jenson Button into the top 20. So that was fun to see. But what we don't have in Formula One is a codified version of what's going to happen. In NASCAR, that's happening. People strategize around it. They prepare for it. They know when that's about, like less than 2 laps to go. We know we're getting overtime. You don't know this in Formula One. And because you don't know this, how the heck do you plan for something like this? It seemed like all the drivers were ready to see just the thing time out, and that would have been fine. When you go to make this decision, okay, they all adjusted to it, but, obviously some liked it better than others, and there's reasons for that. But what I don't understand is, why can we not codify this? Why can we not say, we know what the average amount of time is going to take to clear an incident like this? We have data going back 20, 30 years of marshals. We ought to be able to go and say, okay, 5 and under, what are we doing? If it's 5 laps to go, we red flag. 4 laps to go, we red flag. 3 and under, we just let the safety car go around. That's fine. Less than a lap to go, we throw the checkered flag and we're done. I can understand that, and the teams would understand that, and everybody, I think, would get along a lot better when you have this type of situation where now we took 55 decent racing laps and have thrown them effectively out the door for a 2 or 3 lap shootout. That's hard to take. So I get that too. So I didn't mind a red flag. There was a lot of debris. I do agree with that. And the tire was kind of even not on the racing line, but it was out there and it needed to be cleared.
Yeah, you don't want to hit that. It's heavy.
Right. Like, I was screaming. I'm like, and I think you're right that somebody was mishitting a button, because I almost was like, the track is clear. No, it's not. What are you doing? So it was obviously, somebody screwed up, and then I think they finally hit the right buttons, and luckily nothing bad happened. But yeah, I mean, I just wish we had an easy to follow, understandable manual about what was going to happen at the end of a race. This way that we don't have this debate, because whenever we have these debates, there's a camp that goes back to a certain race a couple of years ago and relives that entire trauma all over again. And we gotta find a way to move forward from that. And the only way we do that is we make it better. And we haven't really addressed the underlying issue of what do we do at the end of a race. So that's where I get frustrated by it. But anyway. All right. So we ended up with the red flag, came out on lap 55. Everybody does go into the pit lane for red flag number 2. They come out, they restart. They would have had one formation lap and 2 racing laps. That was going to be the end of the show. Lap 57 turns out to be quite a mess. Both Alpines take each other out. We had been saying that was like Thanos. It was inevitable, and we got all the way to race 3, and bam, there we go. The Ocon-Gasly relationship, that's gotten off to a great start. So they take each other out. That ends their respective day. Carlos Sainz hits his mentor, Fernando Alonso. We'll talk about this incident in a minute because I want to talk about this one specifically. He ends up spinning Alonso out. Alonso's day looks like it's done, at least in terms of the points. Carlos Sainz gets charged with an immediate 5-second penalty. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And, another safety car gets thrown out. Another red flag gets thrown out immediately. Now, if you're paying attention from last year, everybody remembered it. Fernando Alonso, talk about paying attention. I love the fact that he's a race car driver and knows this shit at the top of his head. Because he said, nobody went through Sector 1. We have to reset the grid. So he was doing it right away. So we never got through Sector 1. But if you looked at the order of when they came into the pits, you want to talk about crazy. Here's what we ended up with. Nico Hülkenberg went from P8 to P4. Yuki Tsunoda went from P11 to P5. Oscar Piastri goes from P11 or P12 to P7. That would have been a crazy finish. But it was not to be. We had a nice half an hour, 30-minute long delay while we tried to sort all this out. They eventually ruled that we did do the Silverstone precedent. We didn't get to Sector 1. So therefore, we have to go back to the last order of the restart. We put Alonso back in P3. We put Hülkenberg back down to P8. We put Tsunoda back down to P11. Piastri goes back, I think, at that point to P10, but we restart with everybody who crashed and was unable to continue off. So the Alpines dropped off. Lots going on. Cody, what's your take?
This is kind of where, and it was incredibly exciting. Like, I loved it. I'm pretty sure I woke up my fiance laying in bed next to me as I got my earbuds in, because as Fernando was going around, I was like, no! But so it was certainly exciting. Like, in a way, they got what they wanted, I think. But as far as how they sorted out the race, I get that the rule is set that, and the rule is if there's a red flag, or and they haven't made it through the first sector, they reset? Or is that for any type of non-green flag condition? Like if they go to safety car, do they reset then as well? Or is it just
because it's a standing start, they have to go back to the order that it was when they could know what the grid is. So it would, I believe, if you happen to throw a safety car before the last car gets to the end of Sector 1, I think you're going to have the same type of situation.
But for the safety car, it's the rolling start. So when they just form up behind the safety car and
then continue that. Right. At that point, that's when if you just threw a safety car, everyone would eventually cross Sector 1. That would be your reset. Yeah. Because they threw an immediate red, they had to go back to this.
And that's kind of where I take issue with how they sorted out the race, because I feel like with reverting, because effectively the end of the race was safety car conditions anyway. They resumed it from the red flag. It never went to green flag. It went right back to safety car conditions. And, so I guess you could say it was like a start from a stop, for being really technical and splitting hairs. But to me, it feels like it was more like a safety car end. And because of having that immediate red flag and therefore resetting the grid back to what it was before, you've got this mix of some drivers that have gotten completely screwed over by those first three turns. What we had, you had Ocon and Gasly, take each other out of the race. We had three or four DNFs just from that lap, and those guys are out. They're not coming back from that. Even if the grid is reset, their cars are toast. They're being punished for that incident, whether rightly or wrongly. And then you have other cars that really got saved by that, like Alonso getting spun around. Maybe not his fault, but that's just the way it went. And, somehow he ends up back on the podium. Not really entirely sure I agree with that. You had Perez go through the gravel. He probably would have finished, possibly outside the points, definitely below where he ended up finishing in fifth, I would think. Who else do we have go off there? We had Lance Stroll go off, and he ended up finishing in fourth.
Right.
So you got some drivers who had really sloppy driving and still ended up with strong finishes, and then you had some drivers with sloppy driving, or perhaps less sloppy, that are, taking all the brunt of that incident anyway. And then you got some guys like Carlos Sainz, who isn't out of the race, but is still getting punished for that portion. I don't know. It was all very confusing. I feel like punishment wasn't built out equally based on how they decided to do that. I feel like
now that I think is the best point of everything that you said, was that the punishment by far was not doled out equally at all. Because so let's talk about Carlos Sainz. So he comes together with Fernando Alonso in turn one, spins Alonso around. Alonso able to keep going, but hits the barriers. In any normal type of situation, that would have been Alonso pretty much out of the points. The field would have passed him. He finishes like probably P15, and that's kind of the end of the day. With this weird rule where we don't have a new grid that happens because we never got to safety car line one. He then gets to come back and reclaim P3 when it doesn't really feel like, well, did he really earn that back or not? And then you double down on that by then giving Sainz an immediate 5-second unappealable penalty where, we saw in the last race, we saw Alonso get his podium restored on a 5-second penalty that they did successfully appeal. So I'm normally in favor of adjudicating on-track incidents within the race, but this is one where, because they made that final decision as quickly and almost as irrationally as they did, he gets completely screwed over. And not just 5 racing seconds worth of penalty, he drops all the way from P4 to P12. Completely out of the points. He's the last finisher on the track, as it turns out. It just doesn't feel right. Like the punishment did not fit the crime. I don't have a problem with assessing him a penalty, but those 5 seconds just absolutely killed him. And so if you're a Carlos Sainz fan or if you're a Ferrari fan at all, you have every right to be really pissed off about this result, because I thought the guy deserved a lot better. It also sounds like you're taking the Haas F1 approach, which would say, okay, well, there's this other line that we call the safety car 2 line that everybody did get past. So if we got past that, why can't we take the grid then? Well, sadly, that's not what the rules actually say. As much as I get your spirit of the rule, did not fitting the crime and all of that, they did eventually get to where I thought they had to get to based on what the rules were. I would have loved to have seen that just go and Hulkenberg maybe gets his freak podium out of nowhere, because if you then give Sainz the penalty and they drop him down, look what happens there. But yeah, how we got to the result didn't feel right, but we got to the result I think we had to get to eventually. So I give the FIA a half score here, I guess. It was probably worthy of I don't. Well, we talked about the red flag thing, so we know what kind of got us here. And if we're going to do the show, then let's do the show. Let's make the teams aware that we're going to do the show, and let's accept it and move on. If we're not going to do the show, fine. I'm willing to live with either one of the lanes, but you can't live on the curb. Your floor gets damaged. This is what happens. So, yeah, I mean, just a crazy end. And like I said, this is the stuff that's going to get remembered about this race, when in the middle there was some amazing, good, fun racing. So, yeah, unfortunately, so to wrap it all up, the Haas appeal was denied. They were able to reset the grid. And by the time I woke up from my long-awaited nap, the race results were finally going final in the middle of the night down under. So, yeah, crazy way to end the first little section of the season. All right. So we're going to catch our breath. We're going to take a quick break. We'll pay a bill or two. We'll come back. We'll see if we can get our guest hooked up and online. And we'll come back. We will for sure do driver standings. We'll recap where the constructors are. Big changes there. We'll talk about your take, the fan email segment. We got some good feedback in there. We'll do our awards. We'll talk about predictions and see where all that shook out. And then we'll call it a night. But so stick with us. Come on back, and we'll be back in just a bit. All right, welcome back to Season 5, Episode number 8 of the Outlet F1 Podcast. It's our 2023 Australian Grand Prix race review. You've got Andy along with Cody tonight. And unfortunately, our guest isn't going to be able to join us tonight, but we have tentatively booked him for Baku. We want him to be on, give a chance to be on the full review with us. So we're going to go that route with our new guest. And so we'll reveal all that. We're going to make you wait a month. That's a tease. We're going to pay that off in a long time. But that's okay. We're excited about it. We're excited to have him on. So, all right. Well, we've gone through the race. We've gone through all the incidents. We now have a very interesting top 10 driver standings. Cody, take it away.
All right. So not much has changed here at the very top of the top 10. But our top 10 for driver standings as of the Australian Grand Prix, Max Verstappen pulling further and further away from the front, up to 69 points now in first place. Sergio Perez still holding on to second place in the points, so still got that Red Bull 1-2 at the top with 54 points. Fernando Alonso, 3 third-place finishes. It puts him third in the driver's standings with Aston Martin for 45 points. Lewis Hamilton is in fourth place, Mercedes, for 38 points. Carlos Sainz could have probably been a little closer to Hamilton, but Carlos Sainz hanging out in fifth place for Ferrari with 20 points. Lance Stroll in sixth place, also with 20 points, but behind Carlos on countback. George Russell in seventh place for Mercedes with 18 points. Lando Norris moving up in the world, eighth place with McLaren with 8 points. Just behind him, Nico Hülkenberg also getting some points from this race. Ninth place with Haas Ferrari and with 6 points. And tied with Nico Hülkenberg in points, also in 6. But behind him on countback, in 10th place, we have Charles Leclerc with Ferrari. And that's got to be a little painful.
So James asks me this every year since I've been on the podcast. Do you want to do a bet with me getting Lando and him getting Leclerc? And I always tell him, we're not in the same stratosphere, James. I'm not going to take that bet. I wish I could have quartered this bet and said take it in the first segment of the season because he's dominating him. Oh my God. How in the heck does that work? I mean, talk about crappy luck for Leclerc. Man alive.
Yeah. If we're talking about the cars, you could still make the argument that they are not in the same stratosphere. Mm-hmm. And yet, Lando is pulling ahead here. I don't really know what to say other than I think that this is just a combination of really awful luck for Charles Leclerc since the start of the season and really good luck for McLaren in this last race.
I think that's exactly it. I mean, I wish I could say it's a trend and it's happening. No, it's not. I got to be realistic here. Maybe they put some bits on the car for Baku and maybe it gets a little bit better and it's not quite so draggy in the rear. But that's the result's not going to hold. If that's holding by the end of the year, Leclerc will probably not be on the team anymore because I think he will have thrown things and broken a lot of equipment by then. Yikes. But talk about, this is why you play the game. Who knew that you'd have that? So talk about some differences in the constructor standings as well. Again, at the top, no real surprises here. Red Bull Racing Powertrains, 123 points. The class of the field easily. Second place, Aston Martin consolidating their position with 65 points. They are 9 points ahead of P3 Mercedes, who check in with 56 points. Fourth place, Ferrari on 26. Off the deck and into P5, McLaren Mercedes check in now with 12 points. They now leap ahead of Alpine. Who would have thought that 3 weeks ago? They only have 8 points. Haas Ferrari check in P7 with 7 points. Alfa Romeo Ferrari check in P8 with 6 points. AlphaTauri Honda get a point with Yuki Tsunoda's promotion to P10 with the Sainz penalty. And Williams also checks in with 1, meaning it only took 3 races, and all constructors have scored points for the second consecutive year. Look at that.
So how many points did McLaren score in just this race?
12. Lando gets 8.
They were at 0 before?
They were at 0. Lando got 8. Piastri with comes home P8. He gets 4.
Man, jumping from 10th to 5th in one race. That's really something.
We've cleared half the grid. We only have half the grid to go. But boy, what a chasm you find yourself at the bottom in.
There's a lot of crazy things here. I mean, they're 3 races in, and Red Bull already has more points than the next 2 teams combined, which is terrifying in a way. But also, you got nice big gap between Red Bull and Aston Martin. A small gap between them and Mercedes. What probably should be a smaller gap between Mercedes and Ferrari. But then the other 6 teams are really close together, and I think it's a side effect of, since you have 4 pretty high-performing teams, you're only assuming that they don't have any incidents. You're going to have, probably Red Bull, Aston Martin, Mercedes, and Ferrari taking up 8 of the 10 point-scoring places more often than not. So it seems like you got the other 6 teams just fighting for the scraps that are left, and I think that's really exciting. You're gonna have a really close battle for the rest of the field here, and no one is like extraordinarily off the pace either. It's going to be really exciting.
It proves what I kind of said at Saudi. Like the midfield is literally this razor's edge, and are you straddling the razor's edge, or are you falling off of it and back into the pit? If you started the race, you would have said Williams were in a really good position to score some good points here with Albon starting P8. You would not have thought, and you would have said Alpine had a great race going. I mean, if they don't take each other out, Gasly was running 4th. He would have outscored McLaren by himself, and Ocon was solid. I think they were 4th and 5th or 6th. So
yeah, they were doing really well.
They were on pace for a mega points day, and it that quickly, and it turned. So again, we may not have a great P1 championship right now, but everything else, talk about all to play for. It's all to play for. And so, I've heard some criticism of the rules, and, we shouldn't have put in a cost cap, or we shouldn't do this, and teams can't, catch up fast enough. I give Red Bull full credit for designing one hell of a race car. That's obviously going to probably be the class of the field for most of this year, unless somebody else finds some magic upgrades and really closes the gap. But beyond that, this is what the rules were intended to do. It was to get, so you started from the bottom to you said it to P6 or to P4. So you got the bottom 6 teams ridiculously close. It can be anyone on any given day. You could be, you could have just as easily seen McLaren back in the back again based on where they qualified and scoring no points. That could have just as easily happened. So
yep. With things as close as they are, like every little mistake is going to count at the end too. You might be looking back on this race at the end of the season and being like, Albon going off after having awesome qualifying made the difference for Williams. Alpine taking each other out of the race made all the difference. It could be that close.
Yeah, execution. Absolutely the name of the game this season. All right. So we've given our takes on this. We will now open the floor to my favorite segment, the fan email segment. And God bless Rachel Fleming. She was DMing me, or literally before the result came out. She was on it. The DM hit my Twitter at like 3-something in the morning. So full kudos to her. So here's her now, what is now an Outlap F1 podcast standard, her take on the Aussie GP. So these red flags, are we totally sure that Michael Massey wasn't in charge today? Because some of those calls were a joke. Before the tragic passing of Charlie Whiting, red flags were extremely rare. Now they seem to be used to spice up the show, which I don't really like. And her second comment is, I'm really glad that Lewis refused to meet Massey to talk about Abu Dhabi. He shouldn't be given the time of day. Cody, point 1 and then point 2 if you want to.
Point 1, yeah, it did feel a little bit like Michael Massey running the show with all the red flags. And didn't quite have, it still had somewhat disastrous results, not championship deciding yet. But on second point, we could talk for a whole show about that end of 2021 and the decisions that were made there at the end of the race. But I guess if maybe Massey just wants to talk to him just to clear the air, and if Lewis doesn't want to talk to him, that's on him. If there's anyone who doesn't want to talk to Michael Massey about how that went down, it would be Lewis Hamilton. So, I don't really blame him either.
Yeah, and 2.1, we discussed earlier kind of the validity of, yes, a red flag, and when do you make it about the show and when do you not? My take on that is, as I've said many times, we ought to have a pre-prescribed codified chart so everybody knows what we're doing. So there isn't this randomness factor of, well, the sun's still out, so let's try to finish this race versus, well, it's raining and we don't really want to, and cars are damaged enough, so let's call it a day. Pick one. Mm-hmm. We either are all about the entertainment, that's fine. Let's accept that. Let's know it. Let's let the teams adjust to it. Or we're not. But don't be straddling in the middle because, like I said before, it just ruins your floor. And that's why the FIA has a leg to stand on when this stuff comes out. I have a special comment about the entirety of the Michael Massey discussion when we get to our awards. So I will just leave that there for now. Just to answer the question, I don't care if Lewis wants to talk to Michael Massey or not. To me, it really shouldn't matter. It happened. We all need to move on from it, and that's kind of it. And he was there because V8 Supercars was there, and he's still the director of the Repsol V8 Supercar series. So it wasn't like they let him in. He was there. He was actually working. But anyway, we'll leave that there for now. Second email, our boy Dave Doherty, who also gives us wonderful comments on Twitter all the time. Shout out to you, Dave. He goes, wow, that was a crazy race. This is why I love F1. It was kind of one of those that you didn't necessarily think was going to be really crazy because sometimes Aussie can be a bit of a parade, and there's like maybe 2 overtakes. But combination of the resurfacing, the 4th DRS zone turned out to be actually very pivotal here. And I think everybody just deciding we got a long break, so let's go bonkers. Makes it one of the more memorable races of the season so far. So I agree with you, Dave, on that. Cody, any thoughts?
Definitely a crazy race. It's also why I love F1. Whenever F1 has a tendency to get a little predictable when you have dominant cars out front like Red Bull. So it's good to see things get shaken up. Australia is one of my favorite races of the year, and I'm always willing to stay up into the wee hours of the morning to watch this one. So yeah, definitely love it, Dave.
All right. So our next fan email comes from Philip, the author and photographer. And his comment was, I wonder if the FIA might somehow change Carlos Sainz's 5-second penalty behind the safety car. Seems so harsh, especially as Fernando ended up okay. We talked about Carlos Sainz. I think he has a legitimate beef here. I get we want to get these on-track incidents adjudicated in the middle of the race, but then when you throw the red flag and how it ended up playing out, the punishment does not fit the crime here. He shouldn't go from P4 to P12. Maybe 3 spots, maybe a grid drop at the next race. I would buy all of that. But you give him 5 seconds added on, and it's not really a real 5 seconds because of the way that they lined up under the safety car. I mean, I saw a graphic, and I'll just to further this, on ESPN's crawler that said, oh yeah, Max Verstappen wins by a margin of, 0.179 seconds. Wow. Lewis Hamilton was right on his gearbox. Of course he was. Because that's when they came into the pits during the red flag. My God. And then the caption read, closest finish in Australia in 10 years. And I'm like,
I mean,
you clearly took that out of context.
Yeah. Something on this one too, since we're going back and talking about Carlos Sainz's penalty being somewhat unfair. I think, and we didn't really touch on this before, that this penalty looks even more questionable when you consider some other things that were going on the track at the exact same time, like, I don't know, Logan Sargent steering his car into the back of Nick DeVries, or Pierre Gasly, arguably unsafely re-entering the track, pushing his teammate over so far that they ran into each other and took each other out of the race, and yet Pierre Gasly's not getting any penalty point for this, possibly because he's right on the edge of a ban.
And making some people who decide to publish news stories before things go official look really stupid. Because I saw a number of, let's just say, on par with Spanish sources publishing articles saying Pierre Gasly gets a race ban for Baku an hour after the thing, before the hearing, and then lo and behold, he gets no penalty. Does he probably deserve one based on this incident? He very well might. There's more than a good argument to say that. Why Carlos Sainz doesn't have a good advocate and Pierre Gasly somehow has the world's greatest advocate arguing with the stewards post the race doesn't make sense. These are punishment not fitting the crime. I mean, if you want to make the case that, hey, look, both cars took each other out, that was the real end to the incident, and that's fine. Okay, but if you give penalty points to a similar incident later on, we ought to hold you to that standard. I got a funny feeling we're going to see the exact opposite in a couple rounds' time, and that's wrong. That's just flat out wrong. So I like I said, I'll accept it here, but that better be the standard throughout the rest of this season. But I got a funny feeling we're not going to see it. All right.
Yeah.
And hey, look who's up. John. Long time. Look who's out tonight. Emailing us from North Carolina. It's good to hear from him, sir. So his points, seems Checo's issues are convenient after matching Max's pace last week. I wonder how much effort is really being put into making Max's life a little harder. 2, George got screwed. That rule is ridiculous. If a red flag comes out after safety car is launched, the field should be reset, plain and simple. And then 3, if you're Ferrari, are you already thinking about 2024? I can see points for all of these. Cody, we'll let you go at this first, and then I'll chime in.
All right. As far as Checo's issues being convenient, I don't think there's any argument that Max is the number one driver there. That said, I don't think they're going to leave Checo hang out to dry to the point where, he's starting from the back of the field in the race. I think they're putting plenty of effort in. I think this just wasn't Checo's weekend. I don't know off the top of my head about how he's performed in Australia in the past, but I don't have any big ones coming to the top of my mind. So not like Saudi Arabia, where he seems to be, always on it, or really just about any other road street circuit. Sorry. George definitely got screwed, but kind of like we talked about earlier on, I think it was, it was unfortunate that he got screwed by the red flag, and it was unfortunate that the red flag was called after the safety car had been called out and he had time to go into the pits. But it was still a risky call. There was always going to be the risk of something like that happening. And, those types of things just happen sometimes where you make a call and things happen and it doesn't go your way. We see it all the time when someone crashes and there's a safety car, and cars that were holding out for pitting get to pit at the opportune time, and some cars just finish their pit stops and they get screwed. So don't think anything really super afoul of the rules there that screwed him over. I think it was just bad luck. And his engine blew up anyway, so in the end, it didn't really matter. And for the Ferrari, yeah, you're probably thinking about 2024, unless they get some upgrades here that put them more competitive, and they do some like voodoo magic that clears away whatever demons are haunting them. I think they're. You said it last week, no, I'm sorry, it was for this race.
It was for the preview.
We talked about it earlier in the week, how they were mostly going out to collect data, from this one. Like, you don't really say stuff like that if you're thinking you're going to be competitive for the championship. So yeah, exactly. They're probably already looking ahead to 2024 as well.
Yeah, I agree with you totally on that point. Like, yeah, I think this was a data collection race for Ferrari, and they didn't even get to really collect a whole lot of race data because Leclerc's race was over on lap 1. So that makes it even that much more painful. Yeah. So do we see the magic P word come out sooner than later? Do we see the pivot word? I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting to hear for it from Mercedes. I'm going to wait hear for it from Ferrari. We'll see where that goes and what they end up all doing. As far as Checo's issues goes, that seemed to be now. Look, both cars have had downshifting problems. We've heard Max's radio complain about it too. I think it is something. I saw a report, or I heard a report that said that they took apart the entirety of the car and they couldn't really figure out why Max would be complaining about that. So whatever it is, apparently is something that they haven't been able to figure out, and that's kind of respective to both cars. With this, if that's a problem, if the downshifting is a problem, well, when you're going into a corner like the one Checo kept going off at, that's going to make it that much worse. So whether Max has figured out some sort of a toggle or a workaround to get his gears down, and Sergio maybe hasn't figured that out, I don't know. But I think whatever it is probably going to be endemic to both cars. Wouldn't shock me if we're going to see at some point a Max go boom. And maybe not have the best weekend. I think that's the only thing holding them back from maybe running the table. But we'll see. They're 3 for 3, so that's still on the table. As far as George, yeah, I can't say it any more than that. I agree. He does get screwed with that. What I would like to see as a fix for this type of situation is race control being on the radio saying to all teams at the same time, we are thinking about red flag. That's all we have to say. Whether or not you do it or not, we're thinking about it. That at least puts it in, everybody knows it at the same time, and then I think we're fine. And then you can do whatever the heck you want. Be informed with your decision-making. Don't assume it's going to be one thing and then have it suddenly flip on you. So I understand that. We talked about the tires. You brought up a really good point about the restart. What do you do then? I've offered the solution. I would say give it an extra lap in the restart procedure, let everybody have the opportunity to come in. I love seeing double stack pit stops. I think they're fun. Let's make these pit crews earn their keep a little bit. And maybe it's 3 seconds as opposed to 2, but I think that would be pretty cool to watch. But let's do it safely. Let's just try to do it safely if we can. And then for Ferrari, yeah, we talked about that as well. So, all right. They are thinking about 20. They're thinking about 23, and then they're also thinking about 24. So again, when do we see the magic pivot word come out with them. All right, time for our awards, and we will start with the weekly rubbish. Cody, I like yours. What do you got?
All right, so I'm going to go for Pierre Gasly for the weekly rubbish award. Alpine stood to score a lot of points this weekend. Both Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon were running in the top 10, looking to well into the top 10, looking to score some serious points. And what could have been a great weekend was taken away in an instant by Pierre Gasly going off the track, re-entering perhaps unsafely, taking out his own teammate by not seeing him and squeezing him to the side of the track. And that was all over in an instant. So, I like Pierre Gasly, and I definitely wish him the best at Alpine. I'm really looking forward to him being in something more competitive than an AlphaTauri, but this one was definitely on him, and they threw away a really good result.
Yeah. So I would agree with you there. I have two. One, the entire front to back started on, I think, Thursday. Michael Massey discussion. If you were anywhere on Twitter this weekend, it was maddening to read. The exact same points, and none of it is original anymore. We have to stop relitigating Abu Dhabi 2021. And it's one certain fan base that just keeps wanting to do it over and over and over again. It's over. I've said it. We did 2 episodes on that damn race when it happened. I think I remember saying I thought the sport took a step back that night. I maintain that today. We can all agree that it was probably the wrong decision, but it's the decision that we have. And the other thing is Mercedes dropped the appeal. I can't scream that loud enough. They stopped the process. We probably should have had a trial. We probably should have let it go until January or February of that year. But they dropped it. They got their head. Michael Massey's no longer the race director. His ass is fired. He's adjudicating Repsol V8 supercars now. And that's why he was there. It wasn't to rub Lewis's face in it. It wasn't some draconian setup to try to make everybody relive the horror of Abu Dhabi 2021 again. My God. And the other thing is, I'll say this again, the justice system in the world isn't always just, and you don't always get the best result. That's life. And it's just sport. So we just have to move on. Anyway.
Gee, unwarranted drama on Twitter?
Yeah. Why? I shouldn't be surprised at this point. And then number 2, and this, we hadn't really talked about this either. The organizers of the Australian GP, I think, do an amazing job. One of the things that they have to get right next time, the track invasion cannot start until the actual race is done. Because there were lots of shots that I've seen from lots of different angles of people trying to get on the track while the people where everybody was on that ceremonial last lap. As it turned out, Nico Hulkenberg's car conked out. He jumped out. The car was in an unsafe condition, which means anybody who touches it has a risk of getting electrocuted. And that is a real danger, and it's an invisible danger. And there's a reason that there's a barrier between the fans and the racetrack. And look, I'm a fan. I want to be part of the show. I would love to do a track invasion and be there and grab the confetti and all that. But there's a time and place for that, and it's not while the cars are on track. Do better. All right. I'm done ranting. We'll move on to the analysis paralysis, and I think we're in lockstep on this one. Cody, take it away.
I think it's got to be the FIA here, and I really think we should keep track of, at the end of the year here, how many times we've picked FIA for analysis paralysis, because I think it's going to be really sad. But this race, I think it's the FIA. I thought they were doing okay early on. They were making some calls that were maybe not making sense initially, but they were hard calls to make, especially the ones going from safety car to red flag. The one with 2 laps to go, definitely hard calls to make. But with how long it took them to sort out the end of the race and positioning, and how it ultimately punished some drivers more than others unfairly. I think that the FIA definitely needs to more clearly decide, as you've said during the podcast, they need to more clearly decide how they want to handle these events when they're so close to the end of the race going forward, and have perhaps some codified rules on it so that all teams know what to expect when there's an incident with, say less than 4 or 5 laps to go in the race.
Yeah, couldn't have said it really much better myself. I agree with you. The FIA, as I've said, I don't need to rehash it, but pick a lane on these end of race calls. Stop the damn ad hoc calls. Nobody wins when that happens, and nobody won really today. And what was a great race gets remembered for all the wrong reasons because of it. All right, so moving on to our Dark Horse Award of the day. Cody, what's your thought on the Dark Horse?
I went with Nico Hulkenberg for my dark horse. He seems to have been kind of having a decent return to Formula One after being away. I felt like this one was his best showing so far. Finished what did we say, 7th place in the race, and got some good points for Haas. Snuck in there probably from luck more than anything else. But it could have been even luckier if cars had just been able to make it a little further around the track before that red flag got called. Who knows? We might be talking about that trick first podium, and we'd probably be talking about it for many years to come.
Yeah, exactly. What could have been, and I was actually secretly kind of hoping that the Haas appeal somehow they'd find some weird code in the rule book to make it work, because I was rooting for it, but I was not surprised that they ended up with the decision that they did. Well, my dark horse, I don't know how many times I'm going to get the chance to do this year, but my boy, Lando, hell of a race, great racecraft. The battle between him, Hulkenberg, and even Perez, the fact that he held up Sergio Perez for as long as he did was actually pretty cool. I was watching it on the timing, and it was only a 10th or 2 off. He was trying to keep Perez outside of DRS for the longest time. He eventually succumbs to it. But that whole battle lasted, I think, about maybe 6 or 7 more laps than it probably realistically should have, just based on the cars. So good on Lando for that. Like I said before, it's a fine parting shot to the MCL, 59 1/4. Let's put that upgrade package on the car in the next race, and let's see what we can actually do and try to get out of this season. We've said it before that midfield is such a knife edge. You don't need a whole lot of gain to maybe make some real hay here. So let's see what we can do with that. Maybe get something out of this season.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, though, if your dark horse is frequently Lando, because on one hand he's outperforming his equipment, on the other hand his equipment kind of sucks.
I don't disagree. Right now, I don't disagree, but I'm hoping the equipment can make it better. So let's hope, at least for my sake. All right. So driver of the day. This was actually a harder call than I thought it was going to be for me. I'll let you go first, and then I'll chime in.
I was kind of hemming and hawing over it myself for a while too, but I did end up settling on Lewis Hamilton. He did everything he had to do. He qualified well, better than the Mercedes cars have been able to get in those first 2 races. He was able to, for as long as George Russell was in front of him and giving him DRS, he was able to hold off Verstappen there for a while, and that all went away once he didn't have that DRS anymore. But he held off Alonso the rest of the race. He survived all those standing restarts, and comes away with a P2. So very well deserved. Also had some of the best moves of the day, I think, especially getting around Max Verstappen at the very beginning of the race. So good on Lewis, and he is my driver of the day.
I agree with you on this. Lewis Hamilton, I think, was by far the best driver that I saw in terms of racecraft and everything on the grid today. Awesome start first of all, to come from P3 to pass the mighty Red Bull in Max Verstappen was, I think, no easy feat. I love the racecraft given on that move. I think that's exactly what you do when a car is on the outside. To me, that is just good darn racing, and you should do that every single time. And if they give you a penalty, then that should be that's a bad penalty. I don't like that at all. And I've seen that called before, and it just drives me crazy. But that's for another day. But I thought overall, the fact that he was going to, it certainly looked, even without the red flag at the end, that he was going to be able to maybe fend off a hard charging Fernando Alonso. Given how good the Aston Martin's been, given the history between him and Alonso, that was going to be a spicy finish. We never did get a chance to see it, but Lewis did everything he needed to do this weekend. I don't know that Mercedes are back, per se, but they were back here. So I'll give them that. Second best car for sure on the grid all weekend. Fine job, Lewis Hamilton and the Mercedes team overall. All right. Last bit of business before we check on out for the night is the predictions. So I ended up with the audience, but it didn't matter. Your predictions were better, and you dominated in terms of the lap time. So good for you for that. You finish with 5 points. You got the pole sitter, quality lap time, P1 podium, P3 podium. You got the fastest lap time. You were quicker than me. Both lap times, track records. You ended up getting what you needed there. So good on you for that. I finished with 4 points. I got the pole sitter, P1 podium, P3 podium. The Mercedes engine is the one that went bang. So I got the prop bet at the end of the day. But you end up winning 5-4, which means then because I had the audience, you get a double point for this weekend. So you're back in the game. I'm up 4-2. All
Honestly,
right. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, honestly, I think with all the crazy stuff that happened, I'm still kind of amazed that we got 2 out of 2 of the podium stuff.
You're right. Exactly. Like if you just read like the race results and you didn't know what was going on, you go, oh yeah, Verstappen, Hamilton, okay, Alonso, oh, makes sense. Must have been a procession. That's why you watch. All right. So unfortunately, now we have to take this break. And we have to figure out what we're going to do with our weekends. We know we're going to have there's good alternatives out there to get you through this break. There's IndyCar is going to be ramping up its season. There's a fun race out in Long Beach. There will be an IMSA race out there as well, so that'll be a fun weekend. It's a bellwether race for IndyCar. Pato O'Ward for McLaren doing very well. Joseph Newgarden for Penske doing amazingly well in that series. They put on a hell of a show too. We could do a whole nother Outlap IndyCar podcast about that race. Wow, that was fun. There's MotoGP coming to Circuit of the Americas in a couple of weeks. If you want to go see their new sprint format, go ahead and check that out. There's still plenty of tickets available there. That's going to be a wonderful show. Talk about weird results in the first couple races. So that championship's all way up in the air. So that's a lot of fun there. So check out whatever else you like to do when you're not watching your F1, but we will be back in earnest after our little mini break. And we've got Baku. Baku on tap is our next race. I call it the Talladega of Formula One. It's high speed, long straightaways. Trim that car out, but there's that castle section that makes all the little twisty bits just interesting. It's either an amazing race or it's a procession, and sometimes you get a little of both. So anyway, we'll be back in a few weeks' time. Cody and I will be back for the preview. We will then have our guest on. Hopefully, we'll have a full show. I'm hoping we'll actually get our first full show with both James, Deanna, and a guest. So we will have maybe 5. That would be a thing to review the Baku GP at the end of the month. But until then, take care. Follow Twitter. There's going to be a lot of interesting news. So interesting things brewing with the sprint format and possible changes ahead of the Baku race, which is the first actual sprint weekend. So keep an eye on our Twitter for that, assuming Twitter keeps functioning. We will do our best to get our word out however we can. And as always, folks, take care, and may all your laps be fast.